Very warm welcome, dear speakers. Thank you so much for joining this very enlightening session. We are glad to have you on board. So we are all ready to take off. We have today some very eminent educators and we have the dialogue phase 3 today. The topic for today is shifting trends and career choices in the new COVID world. And we have a galaxy of speakers. So first of all, let me welcome Mr. Supriyo Guha Roy, the CEO of Presidency Group of Institutions, Bangalore. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure joining this panel.
Mr. Guha Roy is an alumnus of IIM Bangalore and from Jadavpur University from our city where we are hosting the fair currently. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much.
Secondly, let me welcome Professor Ujjwal Kumar Chaudhary. He is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Adamas University, Kolkata, a popular academic figure in media and communications. He served Symbiosis, Amity University, Mumbai, Whistling Woods, and Pearl Academy, Delhi and Bombay in different capacities. He is currently the Pro Vice Chancellor of Adamas University. Welcome, sir. And last, let me welcome Dr. Navneet Sharma, the Dean of IFIM Business School, Bangalore. Welcome, sir.
I am Dean, just a small correction, Dean of the IFIM Business School at Vijay Bhumi University.
Okay, so I'll repeat. Let me welcome Dr. Navneet Sharma, the Dean of IFM Business School at Vijay Bhumi.
Yes.
Correct. So he's a leading intellectual in the area of competition law, markets, regulation, and corporate social responsibility. He's also served in the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, a think tank of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India. Welcome, sir. And let me now welcome Professor Paddy. Professor Paddy is the Knowledge Officer, Chief Knowledge Officer of QS iGauge. QS iGauge is India's first nationwide comprehensive and independent rating system for Indian universities and colleges, and they also happen to be our knowledge partner for the virtual admissions fair. So dear friends, a very warm welcome to all the attendees. Please feel free to ask questions and put them in the Q&A section. So over to Paddy. Thank you, Paddy. Please take over.
Thank you, Sanjeev, and congratulations to Affairs and for organizing this. I know these are difficult times. Students and parents are having difficulty in physically visiting the campus and taking a decision, but I think you guys are doing a great job, and congratulations to Affairs.
Thank you so much.
Let me also briefly introduce my background is also law and economics. I have been an Erasmus Mundus Fellow, graduate my master's from National Law School, Bangalore, and currently working as a Chief Knowledge Officer at QS iGauge. Prior to this, I did hold my positions as Associate Dean Academic at OP Jindal Global University. I was a founding faculty there, worked there for almost 9 years. And then I also worked at institutions like Oro University. And prior to this, I held a position with LSAC as a country head. I've currently moved on to QS as a Chief Knowledge Officer. And I'm really looking forward for an interaction with all of you. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. I think we are on time and we will start. So let me briefly introduce the subject. The panel discussion is going to be in this format. Each speaker would get 10 minutes to reflect his or her position. And then we will move on for a Q&A session, followed by your reflections. And we will also try to take certain questions which are at the Q&A. So when I was looking at a topic which could actually be relevant to the potential students and parents, and I have been at the forefront of interacting with many students and parents due to COVID, and I myself have written 3 to 4 reports pertaining to this subject. One thing I really got to know that the student choices, the career choices which students are making during COVID is significantly changing or bound to change. My first, I would not say question, is my first request would be is the panelists to reflect how and what parameters should students consider in making their career choices during the COVID world. And I think these parameters, if they are the same parameters which existed before, you could reflect upon them. If there are some parameters which are changing, it will be nice for the panelists to highlight. So the first point which I really want the panelists to reflect is how the career choices, are the career choices changing during the COVID world? And if these career choices are changing, what parameters are students using to choose these career choices or to make these career choices? As Professor Ujjwal requested that he would want to be the last speaker, may I invite Dr. Navneet Sharma to make his reflection, and then we will move on to the other panelists. Dr. Navneet.
Thank you very much, Professor Paddy. And first thing I want to say, as you very clearly said, that the career choices, there could be a generic component to it, the generic parameters which were relevant a few years back, and they continue to be relevant now. And then there could be new parameters which people may have to consider. So in terms of generic framework of selecting careers at Vijay Bhumi University, we continue to think that the choice of area of study and choice of career must be in alignment with the discovery, with the core competence of the person. Unless you discover yourself, unless you figure out where you are good at, unless you know that these are my core strengths, your choice of area of study or choice of career shall always remain suboptimal. If you are guided purely by the market forces, then it is highly possible that you end up being an area where there is a short-term happiness, but there's a long-term pain which you may earn. So that's a very, very generic statement. And therefore, at Vijay Bhumi University, by design, our curriculum architecture allows that the very first year and the sophomore year allows for self-discovery. And then only you get into specialization. But that's about the curriculum architecture, which I can speak later. But coming to the immediate component, immediate things, I think since last couple of years, all of us have been hearing terms like gig economy, terms like Industry 4.0. What exactly do they mean? And we need to understand that what has COVID done to this? That is critical to the entire subject. And I'm glad that you have given me this opportunity to set the context on it. So COVID has only accelerated the change. The premise was already there. There is the change, the rate, the gradient, the 10 theta has been accelerated. So therefore, initially, what changes were happening over a period of 100 years, let's say 70 years, 80 years back, they were happening at a rate of 25 to 30 years. Subsequently, they were happening at 5 years. And now that delta of change has come down to 6 months or 1 year. So in a sense, what has changed is the rate at which industry structures are being completely remodeled. Once the industry structures are being changed, the nature of the work itself is changing. And because the nature of work is changing, the choice of career, the format of career per se is changing. And that has an imperative for the education sector as well. The three are integrally connected with each other and cannot remain in isolation. I think those are my initial reflections on COVID and pre-COVID, and what are the parameters students must consider before choosing a course, before choosing a career.
Thank you. I just have noted down 3 important points from your presentation. How, whether it is during COVID or pre-COVID, or it will be post-COVID, the career choices ought to be made keeping in mind the core competencies of students who are ultimately the decision makers and who will go on to decide and pursue a career choice. I think the second crucial point that you mentioned, beautifully so, is that we do not have flexibility in our curriculum, which helps students to actually go and experiment in the first year, because everybody's coming from class 12. They're bringing different kinds of skills, and those skills may not be relevant when they go to higher education. And therefore, it is important in the first year, a curriculum is created flexible so that they could experiment where their strength is and therefore mold their career choices. That was a very, very beautifully put point. I think the last point you also articulated is industries, organizations, companies, corporates have gone a significant change because of COVID. And this change was already happening, but only COVID triggered it and pushed them to change, like from 1x to 5x, maybe, And
that's right.
And I think you also articulated that remodeling in this industries is also going to have a significant effect on remodeling, on curriculum, and maybe integrate both industry and institutions to work much closer. Thank you so much for those three beautiful points you have presented as part of your initial presentation. If I could quickly move on to Supriyo Goharai, who is the chairperson of the Presidency University. Sir, can you please reflect what your perspectives are, because there are a lot of young students who are actually participating, and they would want to know there were some students who wrote to me before this that they initially wanted to go to hospitality. Now the entire hospitality industry is not looking that great. So how do students generally make these career choices, and what they need to take into consideration at this time?
Yeah, I think Dr. Sharma has made an excellent beginning by giving some of the tips. I will, in addition to what he said, and absolutely true that the rate of change has accelerated over the years, and it's only going to accelerate. What used to the technological development that used to happen over a period of a decade or so, today has shrunk, and similar kind of development is taking place in terms of months. So the first thing is that, the students of the current generation need to understand that the factor of obsolescence is going to play a very, very important role when they choose their career. So therefore, someone who is just about to enter into university education today, they need to think not about what the industry is thinking or what the curriculum is being offered today, but what's going to be the shape of things in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line. So that amount of initial thought process has to go in before selecting a career. So that's my first point. Second point is that I also, is a favorite subject of mine. And today there is what I call as there is a democratization of opportunity. There was a point of time that high-end curriculum, high-end research, right, was actually limited to the developed world. Primarily, I'm talking about, the countries like USA, Canada, Australia, UK, probably, But today, the world has really flattened. What's happening in any part of the world can quickly be brought onto and assimilated into the curriculum that we are offering in our country today. I mean, we all are aware of the concept CBCS, choice-based credit systems, which is also very much prevalent in Presidency University. You are constantly tinkering with it, constantly, doing research on it as to what new topics, what new curriculum that we can introduce on the absolute base, be it the engineering curriculum, be it the MBA or other design and other subjects that we offer. So there you can call that there is a superstructure, but then we have to put the polish on that superstructure by constantly introducing, the newer developments, which once the students learn about it, tomorrow when they walk into the area of, when they're basically trying to get a job or trying to place themselves into the industry, their skill set will be valued. The companies and the industry will feel that this is what we want. The third point I will make, and that's obvious today, which COVID has only enhanced, is that companies, ultimately, any corporate you take up, they are interested in understanding their bottom line. That's as the first factor. The profit motive is one of the driving factor. Now, they also understand, the HR of the companies and the top managers of the companies do understand that training and retraining has a huge cost. So what the industry expects from the academia today is to provide them, the ready stuff, the people who understand their lingo and what they're doing on their platform. So therefore today, it's the job of the academicians to ensure that the gap between the industry and academia is reduced. What's happening at the industry level must be quickly absorbed, and the students must be trained so that when they walk into their job scenario, they are talking the same language as possibly their next level or the next level higher managers are talking. They understand that language and they are ready to deliver from day one. So our curriculum must be designed in that manner, and students who are looking to enter into industry, into the university education right now, need to think through and need to look at the right platform which is going to give them the education which is going to be relevant for tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Supriyo. I think, I'll just summarize the 3-4 points you said. I think you largely what you're trying to say is career choices, the way students make, the fundamental way to select institutions have not changed. But what is changing is, whether the students, while choosing a career, are they able to link those choices to skills that they actually possess. And also, I think the last point which you made was very, very, very interesting. No, you're absolutely right. Industries and organizations are actually frustrated to receive students not well trained, not well skilled, and therefore employment is becoming challenging. I recently read a very interesting report in US. It's not that they don't have jobs, it's that they don't have people who have the skills to take those jobs. The question is the other way around. Therefore we see a lot of employment, but many times that employment, unemployment rate has nothing to do with not having sufficient jobs, but not having sufficient people with skills to fill those jobs. I think you're absolutely, absolutely right. When you said that the responsibilities on the institutions to train and impart those skills to students eventually for them to become employable. And therefore career choices, what students take need to be aligned with skills, and those skills need to get a fillip eventually before they end up employable. I think there are very interesting perspectives that we are already receiving. I have a couple of questions, but I'll come back to you
Sure.
at a later stage. But even to you, Dr. Navneet, I have some questions, but I will come back to you. But let me quickly go to Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary to get his reflections on this larger debate of how students need to make their career choices during COVID. Over to you, Professor.
Since the discussion is on the larger issue and very generic and not specific to a particular field, my presentation was completely focused on media and entertainment careers, design careers. So I'm not taking the presentation at this point of time. If you need it, we can do it later. It will need 10-12 minutes.
Professor, you can take the presentation. It's absolutely no problem.
It's very specific, but my my learned predecessors have actually given a very overview, generic idea on this thing. So this round, I can just talk in the same line as my friends have spoken. Whatever you say, Paddy, you are the moderator. Whatever you say.
No, sir. I just thought I have to make sure that you're comfortable in making the presentation what you're prepared. So I leave it to you. Absolutely your choice.
Okay, then I'm getting into the presentation. Please allow me screen sharing. Allow me screen sharing. Host, allow me screen sharing. No, the screen sharing is not being allowed, so I would not be able to go into that. Let me speak generic, no problem. On career choice,
I'm giving you screen sharing in 1 second, please.
We can continue the talk. My first point would be that one should go by heart. There is nothing beyond call of heart on any career choice. How do you come to that is another issue. Psychometric tests are there, counseling sessions are there. Many students keep saying that I actually love two things. I want to be in technology field, engineering field, but I also love photography. I also love, something else like managerial things or entrepreneurial things. So therefore, we must select a choice of career. The students must select that choice, which is top on his emotional radar. So number one would be, or major would be, which is the top choice. And there can be a minor. And this is important to understand. Most universities abroad, and now increasingly in India also, is allowing a major and a minor. So major, which is the choice at the top of your heart. Minor, something that you could do alongside. So an engineering student can do management minor, can do a communication minor, can do a photography minor, can do a law minor, particularly related to corporate law or technology law or cyber law, particularly computer science students can do cyber law. So that could be one way of looking at choice of career. The second way of looking at choice of career is learning to learn. Now this, moving ahead, we are surely in a phygital world, half physical, half digital. So the education will be delivered in a blended, hybrid or phygital manner. And therefore, part of the learning will be left to the learner himself or herself. So the ability to learn, or what should I call as learning to learn, is a part of our new career choices, our new academics. So we need to make youngsters understand how to learn. That's one. And experiential learning, learning through experience, learning by doing, alongside brick and mortar. Brick and mortar because there will be classroom lessons, and click and portal, there will be online lessons. So if you can bring together experiential brick and portal, this sort of learning will determine every career learning going ahead. Yes, project-based learning also should come, because skill I am totally in favor. I have a strong point that there can be a skill-based learning even in literature. Due to paucity of time, I'll not get into that. Even in subjects which are social science, which are liberal arts, even there could be a skill-based learning. But what is significant to understand, in skill-based learning, we learn certain skills, but we do not necessarily learn how to execute the skill in the broader paradigm of the function. So project-based learning and skill-based learning both should go together, because skill gives specific skills, project gives the totality of the operations. And one must understand why the project is given, how it is given, how do you determine the contours of a project till you finish applying your skills and knowledge, till you come to the last point and execute and deliver the project within a deadline. So this entire project-based learning along with skills also a significant part. I would also love to bring here to the point, I'm not getting into the presentation consciously because it's very specific to media and entertainment. If there are 10 minutes at the end, I will do that. But just now, for the generic purpose, the whole concept of teacher and learner is changing. Teacher and student is changing. Teacher was the first person to initiate a topic, and the last voice on the subject is the sole examiner as well. Mentor introduces the topic, but is not the sole voice on the topic. The mentor aggregates knowledge from various sources, links, podcast, YouTube, online learning, his own video, his own PPT, case studies, PDFs, podcasts, yes, all these things together of any given topic, and shares it with the learner 3 days, 4 days before the actual session is being organized, with the hope that the learner actually goes through all of this. Can also have a quiz test before the class actually happens. So mentor is an aggregator. Mentor is a motivator. Mentor is someone who also can explain the things in a very lucid manner. Mentor is also an agony uncle and an agony aunt when there is a crisis. And mentor is also an assessor, evaluator, but not the sole evaluator for learning, because that will stunt the learning of the learner to what the mentor knows. So this is mentor. On the other hand, the student concept has to change completely, particularly in higher education. We all are representing universities. So in higher education, student studies in classroom, learner studies inside and beyond the classroom. Student studies with a structured syllabus, learner starts with a structured syllabus, moves on to organic learning. Student studies for grades, marks and degrees, learner studies for lifetime use or utility or execution of the knowledge. Student studies with a teacher, from a teacher with a specific syllabus. Learner has mentor as the beginning point, but not the end. Experiential learning, his own learning, peer-based learning, learning from friends, learning from case studies, learning through solution or rather project, doing a project, and learning through skills. He aggregates various sources. So the challenge of higher education, therefore, is far more than what it was earlier. And the learner also learns from the industry. So there are master classes and visits of people from the industry, internships and projects and all. So this whole concept of learner and mentor is different from teacher and student of the earlier days. And as I've said just now, flipped classroom concept will now bring in, and the education will really move to a situation where a large part of the learning is learner-based, learner-centric, learner-driven. So learning to learn would become important. Even virtual labs, virtual studios are coming into practice. So careers of tomorrow are not learned only in brick and mortar situations, but virtually, also brick and mortar, through the mentor and beyond the mentor, through the skills and beyond the skills by doing projects. So if we can have that sort of a broader vision, I understand it's not easy for 942 universities multiplied by average of 8,000 students or 10,000 students, which will be, I think, something around a million plus. It will not be easy to really transform this entire million plus crowd to that sort of a situation. So I agree to that. But unless we have persuasion of these goals and thereby an excellence pursuit, we may not be going anywhere much beyond than what it was in pre-COVID times. Post-COVID time is a phygital time, is a learner-driven education, is a project-driven knowledge, skill-based knowledge, and a career which can be even double, because there is no lifetime career anymore. So a major and a minor. And alongside, professional education should also be added to any academic course that is being done. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Professor Ujjwal. I think you took the discussion a step notch above, or I would say beyond what we were actually discussing. You said that, I think the point that you make is career choices from now onwards, students ought to take into consideration not just the factors that they normally take, but also now they need to take into consideration the way the education would be delivered, which could be blended model. So I think that is loud and clear, where you spoke about how the relationship of a faculty student is changing from a faculty who's knowledge delivery based, presumed to be knowledge delivery based, to a mentor-mentee relationship. I think those points were very well made, and I think students now can also take this as a very good input, that please choose your career choices by looking at how going forward these disciplines would impart education, and many a times it could be blended model, which could give you more flexibility and also more time to take up some projects while you are also studying at the institution. So that's a very good point. Let us take this discussion a little bit more forward and a bit more specific. Dr. Naveen, I want to ask this question, especially to you. I do see Vijay Bhumi University. If I'm right, it's India's first liberal discipline university. Is that the tagline?
This is India's first liberal professional university.
Okay.
And when I say that, I mean that there are already a number of universities, number of places where the liberal curriculum architecture has been provided in arts and humanities. But in the professional disciplines, perhaps to my best of my information, we are making a giant leap forward and bringing the liberal framework or the unlimited choice of majors and minors. That is in the professional area. My assessment is that a very novel experiment is being conducted by Vijay Bhumi.
My question is pertaining to that. Whenever we look at liberal disciplines, it brings the integration of multiple disciplines. If you look at the liberal arts education in the West, which has been a huge successful model for many years, and it went down only during the 2008 recession, and it is still finding it difficult to come out of it. If you see, it is actually managing of multiple disciplines. On one hand you have social sciences, you have humanities. On the other side you have natural sciences, and also subjects like maths, logic, and statistics. How you integrate these four different aspects actually makes makes this discipline very unique. So what I wanted to ask you is, when we did a study, we wanted to understand what was running in the minds of students, and one of the studies revealed at least that many students are either moving to technology or healthcare because of potentially job related or job creating jobs than disciplines like liberal disciplines. So I would want you to reflect, what institutions should do differently to reimagine, and see how different disciplines can also provide jobs. I think we all also are aware of the fact that next 1 or 2 years we might be going a little bit of a rough weather in terms of creating jobs for the youth. So I would want you to reflect on that methodology. What is your university doing special or exclusive to make sure that the students at the end of their graduation can become potentially employable, even in those disciplines which people might struggle?
All right, that's an excellent question. I think having mapped the challenges which are being faced by the markets, by the education sector, and clearly those are the ones which are being faced by the students who are in the process of either already studying at the university level or who are going to be admitted soon. To all the participants, I think I would like to particularly remind them that this session is for them. So they should write their questions, as many questions as possible in the chat box or in the question box. And we should be taking that up so that we can align our answers to your concerns, your question. But coming back to Professor Paddy's question, I have a small presentation which I would like to share here. I hope you are able to see this. Is that visible to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please continue.
All right.
Yes,
so
visible.
Excellent. So this is a slide which tells you that in just 10 years, 3 guys lost their jobs. The pilot, the cameraman, and the helicopter. All the 3 lost the jobs. So basically, this is the kind of change which is taking place. And therefore, and let me quickly tell you, because before I answer your question, Professor Paddy, here are some jobs. Just look at the kind of requirement. Here is a job, and I'm showing you some real jobs. So here is a job which requires digital advertising and sales skills. Just look at this. Here is a job which requires finance and process skills together. Here is a job, look at the designation, head of exploration, head of experimentation, head of solutioning. Look at the job, what is the market demanding? Look at this job, work from home, help a consultant in addressing, help a psychologist in counseling, HR specialist in addressing his or her problems. Look at this, work from home, make a podcast successful, bring people, increase presence on social media. Look at these jobs, look at these careers. A compliance manager where you need to know a bit of law, a bit of tech proficiency, compliance format. You have studied law and economics, Professor Paddy. You will understand what it means. Look at the CSR executive. You need to know CSR law, project planning, execution, monitoring, evaluation, impact assessment, and most importantly, stakeholder management. Look at the certified fraud risk assessment. So you need to know finance, you need to know fraud, forensics, investigation technique. What exactly these jobs are indicating? These jobs are indicating that the universities must prepare, must put forward a curriculum architecture differently, must allow to take back to what was just now said, that because learning to learn is the most important thing. Gone are those days when you had a career for 35, 40, 45 years. No. In a span of 45 to 50 years of professional life, an individual will end up having something like 5 careers. And every time a market is disrupted, how do you get ready for a new market is the challenge. Therefore, what 2 fundamental questions to all the participants who have joined today. 2 fundamental questions when I put myself in their position. The first question is, what is my position? And I think my colleagues on the panel will remember this image from the monster.com advertisement. There is a misalignment, a dancer doing the job of air traffic controller. There is a total misalignment. Look at the amount of unhappiness this person will have because of not aligning the work with the passion. And even if I discover, how do I really get to my chosen career? These are 2 central questions which we have to address. Therefore, what we are doing, look at this now. Just let me pause here for 10 seconds. Why did you leave your last job? The company relocated and didn't tell me where. I mean, we can laugh at it, but actually it's a grim reality of the market. The industry structures are fast changing. Because of the technology driven disruptions, the market structures are completely changing. The product and services, the way they could have been delivered, the way they are being delivered now, those were totally non-existent. There are completely new business models. There are completely new ways of doing the same age-old jobs. Therefore, let me take you here. So, therefore, what the universities, to answer your question, Professor Paddy, I think this T word was mentioned a bit earlier. So there is a horizontal bar and there is a vertical bar. So you need to develop certain generic skills. This is what the universities need to do. And at Vijayabhumi University, what we do, we have a bouquet of practice courses, such as the Outbound Leadership Lab, such as the Purposing and Mentoring, Personality Enhancement Program, Social Immersion Program, Industry Internship Program, and so on. So there are certain in practice courses which allow you to discover yourself, know your mind, know your body, know your society, know your business environment, know your employer, and think clearly, structure a problem, structure a solution, write well, and speak well. These are the generic skills which you acquire through variety of practice courses. And then there is a vertical bar of majors and minors and super specializations. So this is the way you prepare not only for the immediate term, but also for the long term. Now let me take you, these are some of the pictures of the university, but most importantly, this is what I want to show. So what we are doing with our practical example, let me show you. When a student arrives at the L0 level, the first year, there are 8 baskets and the student is asked to choose at least 2 courses from each basket and figure out where I'm good at. That's the first thing. You discover that, and then you go on to take up your L1 and L2 courses. So for instance, if you want to be a good advertising professional, so you study not only advertising, but also communication design. You understand visual intelligence, you understand that how, along with advertising and visual design, you also learn data science. Unless you just now saw, the job required you to have advertising, sales, and digital skills. So unless you are able to choose multiple majors and multiple minors from across the baskets, your future cannot be secured, neither in immediate term nor in long term. So this is what precisely universities need to do, where 2 things to conclude. Number 1, you must be allowed to discover yourself. Number 2, choice. In one word, choice is the name of the game. Unless the universities are allowing a fairly healthy deal of choice, I think the university education runs a risk of losing its relevance. That is a major statement I would like to bring here. Thank you. Professor Paddy. You're on mute.
Unmute yourself, Professor Paddy. Unmute every time.
Yeah, it's not working. I pressed it twice. It didn't work. So I'm so sorry. So it's a very, very, I would say, welcome note, Dr. Navneet, what you are doing at Vijayabhumi University. Let me just resurface why what you presented really. I'm glad to see that the marriage of social sciences and natural sciences is happening, because many institutions call themselves as liberal liberal arts or liberal discipline school, but they don't have that kind of flexibility in the curriculum. I think that's a very, very good point you made. Second thing, I also like the fact that when we talk about skills, you are focusing and giving some credit-based courses on skills. I think that's a welcome note. Also, I think it's interesting to see how you have developed the curriculum. But let me come back to you. I have another question, but I'll come back to you. Let me focus back to the other panelist, Mr. Supriyo. Professor Supriyo, I have this question. You emphasized a lot on skill development, how institutions are highly profit oriented, and therefore companies and industries and organizations are looking at receiving well-trained, well-skilled people. My question to you would be, if you look at institutions, right? There is, one is the formal education that you impart to the students. The other could be innovative, certified, skill courses, where you could even have a center for skill development within the institution, which identifies the different programs that you offer, which identifies the different, undergraduate studies programs that you offer, and therefore train students. Do you think going forward, since making the students employable will become key, institutions should also start imbibing the role of a trainer and not pass it on to organizations or corporations? What are your viewpoints on this?
Precisely so, Professor Paddy, because, as a university, Presidency University Bangalore, indeed believes that we must deliver finished product, right? So in a way, therefore, you can call, we call ourselves as a finishing school. So we don't deliver something which is, still in the making, and then ask the industry to further mold and then make them, what is called employable, and they can deliver economic stuff to their employers. So now getting back to what we are doing and what I believe, we believe that as such academia should do is to create a platform where the students will get a lot of opportunity to do both industrial and professional practice. What we are doing right now is that, for example, we have created an incubation center. We are setting up a number of center of excellence in collaboration with in the industry, right from the majors in the IT industry to the mechanical engineering, civil engineering, petroleum engineering, and others. The various engineering programs that we offer. Similarly, we are also offering business labs, etc., in collaboration with the various corporates, as well as the big four in the audit firms, etc. Now, essentially, what we are doing that we are trying to blend the academic inputs with a lot of industrial practice, where the students will get an opportunity to test their knowledge, right, on what's happening around them, what are the challenges being faced in the industry today, right, and they are being encouraged to take up jobs in consultation with their mentors, their professors. They are taking up jobs from the industry, getting involved into real life problems and offering solutions. So these are not the large ones. These are small projects that we encourage them to take up. And through these, they have, a learning process which gets very deeply ingrained in them, because we also believe, we have been talking about liberal education. Every education is kind of having a liberal side of it. So what probably a student needs to know is how to look at an issue, call it a problem or an issue, then how to formulate a solution. Now the solution can vary depending on the situation. All right. Secondly, in order to make them, I use the term that we have to ensure that our curriculum and our delivery to the students must make sure that there is a lower degree of obsolescence, or the risk of obsolescence, as they walk into their career. So what we are trying to do, and as I could see, whether it is Vijay Bhumi or it is Adamas and many other universities around the country is trying to do, is basically bringing in a lot of interdisciplinary programs. So if I'm talking about an engineering student, the student will not be limited to only to the particular stream she or he has chosen. So right within the engineering, they can break into other related areas. For example, in our university today, we are offering mechatronics, so where mechanical engineering blends seamlessly with electronics engineering. Okay, we are bringing in the concepts of IoT. I'm just giving some specific examples. So basically, again, when it becomes an IoT, then we are talking about smart machines, which is addressing the issues of Industry 4.0. So we are introducing those kind of curriculum. And over and above, what we essentially do is that we do understand that when a student walks in, right, from a school level curriculum, which is typically prevalent in India, they have not been given an exposure, quote unquote, what is known as out of the box thinking. So we encourage them, we take them through certain programs which we call as employability enhancement programs, or EEP. Now, essentially, these programs throws various challenges in front of them and nudges them to think out of the box, right? Then we take this set of students into our incubation center and then ask them to do experimentation. We take them to the various center of excellences, give them exposure to what are the industry practices are. And to this particular framework that we have created in our university, I'll add one more point. And we strongly believe in the concept that there's no point reinventing the wheel. So what we have done is that we have tried out with a large number of universities across the world, and we are doing collaborative research as well as student exchange and faculty exchange programs, through which our faculties and students will constantly get exposed and challenged as to what's happening around the world, what are the newer challenges that is coming up, so that they remain at the forefront of the development. So I believe that when these concepts are all put together, then you are creating a platform and an infrastructure which will give the students the right kind of input and turn them, as I think what Professor Chaudhary was mentioning, as a lifetime learners. Because in 3 years or 4 years of education, what you can at best try to do is to just open their mind to become a learner, right, of a learner for a longer duration, so that they know that what the challenges they're going to face 5 years or 10 years down the road is unknown today. How the industry will move, how the technology will move, what is going to be the shape of industry 5.0, no one knows. So the point is that once a student turns into a lifetime learner, quickly they'll be able to identify those opportunities and again get back to a learning opportunity which in future is going to be largely digital, largely distributed, and to a great extent flexible. So when they're back into their work area, they will continue to learn, coming back to their either alma mater or anywhere to a learning center, and continuously upgrade their skills and remain relevant. So that in a sense is what we are trying to create and offer to our students.
Thank you so much, Professor Supriyo. Let me just reiterate what you said. A few years back, when I was working with OP Jindal, I was a part of the founding team which wanted to set up the Liberal Arts and Humanities School. And I told my vice chancellor that I want to go and visit some of the best liberal arts schools in US. And I was traveling and wanted to see how the schools were set up. I did make a visit to one of the very distinguished colleges called the Pomona College, and I saw a very interesting poster as I entered the college. The poster was very well described, and it beautifully suits what you are actually talking. There is a very nice poster which says that the scientists may say that we may want to clone a dinosaurs, and in bold it was written, it will be only humanities which will argue that it is a bad choice, or a bad, a decision to make. So I think it summarizes that there needs to be an integration of humanities with sciences. I'm glad if Presidency University is giving that option for students who are studying engineering and technology to take some humanities courses, so that they understand how humanities can play a significant role in understanding scientific development and scientific evolution. I'm glad to hear your voices on that front, and I'm really looking forward to see some more experiments, going forward on those lines. Thank you so much for making that, answering that question. Let me take the next question, Professor Ujjwal. You did talk about that you had a presentation to make on media studies and journalism and mass comm. Let me tell you, I've been doing my own research for many years, how institutions are evolving. technology disrupted the most to the discipline of media and journalism. And media and journalism was the school which got absolutely disrupted with technology,
Exactly.
and school had to innovate and develop. So I think one level technology has absolutely disrupted media. COVID has given phenomenal
Huge.
challenges to School of Media and Journalism.
Right.
I think it will be very nice to hear from you, because
Fine.
there are students who want to take mass comm, but
Fine.
they still are they're worried about the disruptions actually taking place in your
We'll
area.
talk.
I think it'll be good for you to reflect. Thank you.
Yes, I'll spend the next 7-8 minutes on that. But I'm very happy to listen to my previous speakers speak on lifetime learning, speak on skills of the moment are not enough. They need to be learned, but new skills will come in. Therefore, the approach has to really blend the left side and the right side of the brain. Left side, the aesthetic side, the right side, the more rational and logical side. So these points which have come are very good. The liberal approach has to be the approach in the country. It was not the case earlier in our education in 20th century. Now that it's coming up is a great thing. We also have the similar approach, but not getting into the same points which have already been discussed. I will get into the presentation, but I'll go fast, focusing on the parts that we may need to know now. Yes, just a minute, allow me. Yes. This presentation is on COVID impact on media and entertainment in new normal. Exactly what you said, strengthening of the media convergence. So there are 6 types of media that we are talking about. Newspapers, magazines, which are offline media, outdoors, kiosks, cinemas and hoardings, offline media. And both of these have been impacted very much. We'll find that. Social media portals, web entertainment, online media, which is on the growth curve, faster. Radio and television, on-air media, it needs a lot of changes. Events, road shows, on-ground media, it needs a huge change. And media on the handset, mobile media is on the rise. So news media circulation has gone down and it will not go back to the pre-COVID era. Costs are mounting. Television news is repetitive. Employment is reducing. More than 1,050 jobs have been cut off from the largest 4 newspapers of the country. Television news, too much of dramatics and TRP pressure. Radio news, unfortunately, legal barrier is there. This is a very peculiar thing. Government of India allows private news in television, but not on radio. So news media will be now digital-led convergence. In the 20th century, it was print-led convergence. There was television, there was digital in a small manner, but print was bigger. In the 20th century, it became television-led convergence. And now going ahead, it will be digital-led convergence. We already find Mozo channel, mobile journalism channel, which is there of Barkha Dutt in YouTube. You can see how she has covered the last 77 days on the ground, particularly of the migrant laborers movement and all that. Why digital news will be reigning ahead? It's portable, it's on your mobile, it's updated, search driven. Newspaper fix the news that you have to read. Television fix the news that you have to watch. But in case of digital, you search. Lower cost to produce. Audio, video of television, text, infographics and pictures of print. All 5 can be integrated, converged in case of digital. User generated content, citizen journalism, no gatekeeping. Lot of democratization of media has happened. Lower entry barriers, accurate analytics. You cannot bluff with your circulation figure or TRP figures. Here are Google Analytics and Alexa ranking and other rankings give the accurate figures. So business options very clear. Crowdsourcing is possible, but there is the challenge of the false content. I don't say fake news, because if news is there truly, then it cannot be fake. So mis and disinformation information is there. Media literacy movement is required. So news media, to conclude, will be digital-led convergence. Revenue moving away from ads only. Search media above push media. Earlier job losses will be there of earlier talent. That means the people who were in television-led convergence or print-led convergence will be losing jobs. But new talent, which is digital-led convergence, will be gaining a lot of jobs. In fact, there is a huge amount of jobs available just now, but takers are not there because they are not digitally trained. Cinema. Long closure of the largest chain of theaters, AMC in US and Cineworld in Europe. The closure itself shows blockbuster cinema in theaters is going down. Short films, OTT release of feature films are happening. New life to independent cinema in US. Already Anurag Kashyap produced one cinema, has launched on the OTT platform. Story is the hero, no more the stars. Story is the hero, less characters, more intense, cost lowered. 2019 box office already had higher income for the streaming platforms online than the box office or the theater income. But this time, the box office may be as low as 15 billion because of the lockdown, and the streaming video platforms, including the OTT, would be 100 billion plus. The largest documentary festival of the world, CPS Docs, has gone online for the first time and still registered 30% higher audience and 18% higher revenue. And you'll be astonished, Cannes Film Festival, the largest in the world, is going digital coming September. Blockbusters will come back, but mid and small budget cinema will go online. Television has got a new lease of life. New content challenge is also there. News TV will do well, but credibility crisis is there. Stories from the web is now a big challenge to TV. Earlier, television was challenged to television was breaking story, was a challenge to print media. Now, digital is breaking story. Twitter is breaking story. YouTube is breaking story, and it's a challenge to television. TV must reinvent as the conscience keeper of the nation. And TV digital convergence will happen and rise. So television journalists also have to be digital in a way. And in entertainment, episodic, one episode, one story. That sort of, and short films, film premieres, these will come. These are the television in the new normal. In radio, digital and analogous, both are rising. But radio liberalization, this is the time. We have to allow news on radio, private radio, which has been asked by Ashok Mitra committee more than 15 years ago. But neither of the Congress or the BJP government has actually done it. Niche radio will rise, like in US or in UK. Lifestyle, health, city issues, education, beauty, sports. Radio focused on these areas will come up, which has not happened in India yet. Campus, online and community development radio, which started earlier, will get a huge boost now in the new normal. Podcast will be important. Podcast is audio message or audio content, which will go in portal, TVs and everywhere. Radio is getting new life, but it is unfortunately limited to music unless news is allowed. Digital branding, go digital. Basis of branding will be digital. Go convergent. That means others will also remain, but digital first. Mobile first. The campaign has to be mobile first. Mobile has gone down to the 86 crores of population of the country, and smartphone has gone down to every level now. Brand promise and stakeholders focus, and the communication has to be compassionate in today's time. Social, physical distancing. I do not believe in social distancing. It is physical distancing and social bonding. Saluting Corona heroes. This sort of branding is being done by McDonald's. The two arches of M of McDonald are being separated. Pidilite, that is Fevikwik and Fevicol. The two elephants stuck together are being separated. Imami, Byju's, everyone, even Oyo, everyone is bringing saluting the Corona heroes. Volkswagen has come out with a very beautiful 2 minutes film on saluting the Corona heroes. The compassionate communication is required. Health, food, essentials, hygiene message is required. Clutter of ads is ineffective. So go into act and not ad. Act means stories. Tell about the story of physical distancing. Tell about the stories like IKEA has done, dedicated shopping time for Corona warriors. Like viral films done by Oyo. Like viral film done by Cadbury's. And they are bringing it in OTT through OTT also they're bringing in. TikTok, Insta influencers videos are also they're bringing in. Sunrise Masala has come out with a beautiful ad, 2 minutes ad, which talks about the spices which boost immunity. And Sunrise, the name, the brand comes at the end. This is the type of communication that is required in branding. So Corona impact is going to be long-term, no myopic vision. Out-of-box solutions is required. New consumers are restricted in social interaction, and therefore they need psychological connect. They need social bonding. Brands have to look at social bonding and psychological connect and not aggressive sale of their services or the products. Short-term acquaintance to sustain loyalty, communication to conversation. Pre-COVID, it was brand communication. Post-COVID, it will be brand conversation. And that's a big difference. Enhanced digital habits of people are changing the nature of education, health, legal services, and entertainment services. And hence, the brands have to change their communication pattern. Public relations, press conference digitally. We have also done one. AU, Adamas University combats COVID. On this document, we brought out all the things that we have done on the context of COVID. It was not released physical press conference, but 82 journalists through a press conference. Digital reputation. What are you? Online dossier of your organization. The digital personality of the brand and the leader. Webinar speaking slots at the top level. This becomes the new media on PR. So it means online PR or online reputation management or new media PR. Events. E-events, digital events of all brands, concert, literature, festival, everything. Even FICCI Frames of July 2020, the biggest media business meet of the country are all gone online at this point. CPL talks have told, Cannes Festival have told. At this point when we talk, Bundesliga is being played in Germany, played on the ground with gloves and masks and all that, but no audience in the stands, and completely digitally and television wise amplified. Webinars with an entry fee, with high placed resources or speakers and sponsors, these are also happening. This is very interesting. Esports tournaments have come. Phygital events will be the future. So events will remain physical plus digital. Physical will be small but digitally amplified in a big way. Media businesses will change, lower the costs, turn digital and create unique value to command the price. Surround the stakeholder with multiple touch points. This is an important point. We have been talking about 360-degree communication. We are moving to 720-degree communication. 360 was print, television, having a digital presence in some way, radio and television, radio and events. But now there is another 360 from top to bottom, which is inclusive of all social media, all digital touch points. Crowdsourcing of funds will come in a big way. Films, portals, digital events, web entertainment. Even Guardian newspaper has gone digital and it's crowdsource funded now. The Where in India or let's say Scroll.in, these are all crowdsourced. Wavy of independent talent will come who will work and collaborate and not compete. Each one will have an USP. Convergence is the way forward with digital at the top. Therefore, media education, media content, media technology, and media business. All three things should be told and taught. In fact, mentored. Media content is there already. Media technology is in some universities, but media business hardly is being taught. Multimedia journalism, web-based digital entertainment, integrated marketing communication, in journalism, in entertainment, in brand communication. These will be the way forward. So online courses are must. We have tied up with a couple of online organizations, including Coursera. So there would be different others. Even the universities will come out with their own online courses. Diverse webinars, personal gadgets and high-end digital skills, engagement to productive participation, not just engaging, but productive participation is the way forward in media education. Teach less, demonstrate more, mentor more to have outcomes. So outcome-driven education, outcome-based education, OBE, read to analyze and apply, portfolio and live projects creation, internships, masterclass, live projects, ongoing projects, real-life cases, and travel for better media education. Convergence to specialization. No standalone non-digital media is going to survive. So closing point, 720 degrees surround communication replacing 360 degrees. User-generated content will become stronger than journalist-generated content. Platform focus, not merely agenda setting. Don't set agenda. Don't drive your agenda or gatekeep. Create a strong platform. So gatekeeping to gate opening. Focus on brand promise, brand value, and stakeholder, and not on aggressive sales only. Crowdsourcing and consumers paying willingness. This will be the newer sources of revenue. Low cost, high value. USPs. Create USPs. Digital, phygital, and convergence. First digital, then going phygital, and finally convergence. So these are what I would say my suggestions with respect to the communication and media of the future. How it is, I did a very fast one to save time only, but I hope I could bring home the point that we are moving to a digital driven convergence, a 720-degree communication, and education that will be partly on campus and partly in the field, and learning skills, but being open to newer skills of the future. So lifetime learning in media as well. Thank you, Professor Paddy.
Thank you, Professor Ujjwal. We are running short of time, but I'll extend the session for 5 more minutes because I think they're very deep insights that have triggered during the course of conversation. One quick question I actually wanted to ask Dr. Navneet related to the presentation that he made. 9 years back, I had written a piece to India Today on academic freedom, related to what you said, flexibility in course and curriculum and the choice of elective courses students ought to make. Let me be very honest, as we are still regulated by, institutions like UGC, and, it doesn't give complete freedom to, forget about students, even to faculty to deliver courses in which they have their research expertise. So recently, just 3 days back, we had a very interesting report that surfaced that India is really struggling to make its rank, in terms of academic freedom. that is actually given to institutions in terms of faculty and students. How do you think your university is going to handle this? Because until unless you don't give complete academic freedom to students to choose courses that they would be interested in studying, to choose, even though you might have 2 students who are interested, you still may have to offer the course. That would bring a lot of disruption in faculty student ratio. So how these are challenges, these are real challenges for institutions. But what you get out of this in terms of rewards are immense. So how are you going to balance academic freedom on one side, regulation on the other side, and your own institutional aspirations? So it's a three headed line. So how are you going to balance this, Dr. Naveen? Unmute yourself.
First thing is that, in terms of regulation impeding innovation, that's your first question, right? Does the regulation by either UGC or AICTE, does that impede innovation? My answer is that, of course, there could be very, very specific areas where it may stifle innovation. But broadly, the spirit of the regulation is not to set the ceiling. Whether it is curriculum or faculty recruitment or faculty, what you call qualification criteria, whatever the regulator is setting, it is basically the minimum. Regulator is not saying maximum, right? And the place where you also have worked at, Jindal, has experimented, has very successfully challenged the regulatory limits. So therefore, I am not of the view that the regulator is necessarily stifling innovation. So that's my first statement to say. Regulator is setting a minimum guidance so that across the institution, a minimum guidance, minimum level of education, minimum level of curriculum, minimum level of teaching, minimum level of teachers can be ensured, right? And of course, there are number of implementation issues, and thankfully of late, regulators are showing a lot of willingness to lend their ear, listen to the concerns, and I think they have been engaging with the stakeholders very successfully, to their credit. So that's something I must acknowledge upfront, right? Second question is that the second part of your question is how our university is going to balance the institutional aspiration, the student aspiration, and the feasibility of providing that freedom, providing those majors and minors, etc. So at the university level, we have 4 schools, and as of now, we are offering 8 courses. So 4 schools: law, business, design, and data science. Each school has got areas of impact identified, right? So that's one area which is representative of the institutional aspiration, so to say, right? And once we set the institutional aspiration, we align our teaching, align our research, align our, for instance, social immersion project. I just showed you the T-bar that has got practice courses, right? So therefore, align our teaching, align our practice courses, align our industry engagement, align our consulting, align our research in the impact areas in order to fulfill the institutional aspiration. So that's one part of the second question. The second part is that when you have 2 students, opting for a particular course, and whether or not are you going to offer it, right? So answer is very clear that not every course can be made economically viable. But so therefore, it's a question of portfolio, how you invest. Let me put it in the finance language. How you invest. Does every stock give you returns? Perhaps not. It's the portfolio return which are to be measured and which ought to be looked at. So therefore, to say that I need to ensure every course's financial viability would be a wrong way. That way, one would be stifling, one would be impeding the choice of the courses. So therefore, the bouquet of the courses to be offered at the school level should be the criteria to see whether offering of certain number of courses is viable or not viable. If that kind of microscopic view is taken by a school or a university, that there must be a minimum X number of candidates, only then I'm going to offer a particular course, then I think it's to put it simply, it's a self goal, nothing much, and which at least Vijayabhumi University is not going to score. That is something I can certainly proudly proclaim here. I hope I've answered your question very clearly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, because I think that absolutely directly relates, because at the end of the day, if we are going to create these flexibilities, we also may want to seriously consider and understand why these choices are being made by students. If that flexibility is not created, then we are actually speaking, not doing. But I'm glad that these innovations are actually now being taken by institutions going forward and create more academic freedom for students. We are running out of time, but I just wanted to close and really thank all the panelists for today. Thank you so much, Professor Supriyo Gurai. It was really nice hearing your perspective. Thank you so much, Professor Ujjwal. I think you rushed your presentation, but I request that you can share your PPT with affairs, so that if students want to know what the generation Z new media is going to be like, so they can get an understanding. Dr. Navneet, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to hear to you. And I think one thing I would really want to tell the students and all the panelists, we are shifting gears. We are moving from F2F model to a blended model. I think one thing we need to keep in mind is the mental health situation as we speak today is not great. We are not hearing great news on that front. I hope institutions do take some steps to make sure that the mental well-being of the child is also of utmost importance. Thank you. I'm signing off from QSiGage. It was really a pleasure. Off to you, Sanjeev. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Navneet Sharma, Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary, and Mr. Supriyo. Thank you so much for joining us this panel. I would like to further add that whatever Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary said, it resonates in the real sense of what we have brought for the students on this platform. For the last 25 years, we were only concentrating on face-to-face education fairs, which only emphasized on human coming to our fair, which was held across the country, across different locations. This COVID actually made us change everything, made us change our strategy. We still kept that alignment of face-to-face, but we brought it digitally. So I request all students who've been joining, please make the best use of it. Today is the last day of the fair, virtual admissions fair. We have another session lined up immediately after this, where we have some distinguished vice chancellors joining us. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much to QSiGage for curating these sessions. And thank you, Professor Paddy. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.